Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Tech Whispers. I am kicking off a new mini-series that I've been so excited to share. It's called CI4CI, or Critical Infrastructure for Critical Infrastructure. And why does this matter? Well, because we are living through a once-in-a-generation reinvention of America's physical and digital backbone. Trillions, and that's with a T, of dollars are flowing into modernizing power grids, pipelines, water systems, in the data centers that power AI's explosive growth. At the heart of all this are a few extraordinary digital leaders who are quietly architecting, securing, and scaling the systems that power our nation and the economy. And today, we get to learn from one of the very best. His name is Afshean Talasaz. He's the Chief Technology and Data Officer at Colonial Pipeline. And we'll talk more about his remit here in a minute. What makes Afshean so special is how he tackles the big, gnarly problems that others avoid, how he sees around corners, how he frames complex challenges simply, and earns trust from the skeptics, all while staying humble and letting the results speak for themselves. So today, we're going to unpack how Afshean thinks about AI, data, and leadership. So Afshean, welcome to the podcast. Awesome to have you here. Thank you for allowing me to shine the light on your story. This has been a long time coming, especially where I know you like to keep a low profile.
Oh, thanks, Dan. It's really great to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
So this is going to be a gift to our Tech Whispers audience, because every time I talk with you, I feel like my brain just got a little bigger, and I learned different ways of thinking about and tackling the big, gnarly challenges of our times. You know, the great thing is you're the first of a few special guests that we're going to feature on this Critical Infrastructure for Critical Infrastructure series. So, you know, that's my shorthand is CI4CI, as we've talked about before. And, you know, I think too often, actually, when people hear critical infrastructure, they think old news. They think, old grids, they think rusty pipes, they think dusty legacy systems. But with AI fueling unprecedented demand for compute power, trillions of dollars are being invested to reimagine and expand the physical and digital backbone of the U.S. Can you talk about Colonial's business and the scale and the vital role you play in that ecosystem?
So Colonial Pipeline, essentially, we move refined products via pipeline from the Houston refining area all the way up the East Coast, all the way up to the New York Harbor. We move about 100 million gallons a day, and we do that day in and day out, 365 days a year. And we supply about 50% of the Eastern Seaboard's refined products needs. So that's things like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. So we move a lot of product and supplying it to the people who need it every day to do what they do, to live their lives day in and day out.
Yeah, so incredible. Most people know the company, and I'm not sure if they realize just how important the company is. We'll get into how technology is really enabling all that magic that happens every day. But, you know, a good executive recruiter, a friend of mine, Sean Banerjee, always says, if you've seen one CIO job description, you've seen one CIO job description.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, I think these are morphing into very different things with different companies. So talk about your title, the roles, the remit, the hats that you wear, Afshean.
Sure, yeah. So my title is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Projects and Innovation. I'm also the Chief Technology and Data Officer. So on the technology side, I'm responsible for both IT, OT, cybersecurity, physical security, data, and AI. And then on the strategic project side, that's really like large enterprise scale projects. And then we also have an innovation team that works across all of the various domains in the organization to help drive innovation within our business.
Yeah, you say it so calmly, and there's a lot going on there, Afshean. And
Well, it's really exciting, right? It's a privilege to be able to lead the teams and to work here, and so it's an exciting opportunity to be able to impact the organization.
yeah, and that you are doing, and you know, I know that your CEO Melanie Little and you have worked together now in two different companies, and
We have, yeah.
yeah, tell me what two incredible CEOs. So, what have you learned from Melanie? And talk about that relationship, the importance of that relationship.
Yeah. So I've actually learned a lot from Melanie, but one thing that really, really stands out is how to be prepared. She is the most prepared person that I think I have ever worked with. And that's something that I've really learned for her. And I see the impact to that, everything from, meetings to everything else that we do. And so I think that's really important, but it also helps, you know, to create the opportunity for generative conversation, right? To talk about, not only just technology, but other things, but in the context of technology, really like how that can impact the business. How does technology really fit into the overall picture of that business? And have, I think, a generative and strategic conversation around how technology can impact both the current and the future of the business. I think too, that CEO CIO relationship is so important as well, especially with how technology is moving and how quickly it moves, but also how it really fits into overall how you think about enabling the business, right? Both the current and future opportunities of a business. And most things, ultimately somewhere, somehow, either minor or major, will intersect technology in some way, right? And it maybe have a larger influence or a smaller influence, but generally will intersect technology in some way. And so having technology be a part of that strategic conversation, I think is just extremely valuable.
Yeah, really good points. I think there's a real big delta between good CEO CI relationships and great CEO CI relationships, and it's been fun to watch what you're all doing there. And one of your superpowers, one of the things that, and I know you get uncomfortable when I start saying this about you, but I'm going to anyway because I got you here. Um, but you've
Okay.
got this special ability to look around the corner to anticipate trends. I mean, no one can predict, but to really see what's coming, prepare your team, and just wondering if you as you look back on a career, how'd you build that muscle? Are there certain patterns that you look for? And what does that do for you in terms of helping you plan better and pivot better and mentor and lead better?
I think to the first part of your question is I'm a very curious person and I like to learn and I like to learn about all different kinds of things. They may not have anything to do with technology. They may not have anything to do with the industry. I really like to learn a lot of different things, and I'm very curious about those things. And I think that also helps, right? I think that provides at least some like broadness. I think one thing that's really important too is and I really learned this from studying music is looking for what's not there. And so, in music, you kind of think about the notes that aren't played are sometimes the most important things that are happening in music. And so, I think when you're looking at things that are coming, not only are you looking for the signals, if you will, that kind of might sort of make some things apparent. But I think it's also really important to look for the things that aren't there, that may be those things that you would expect to be there that aren't. And then that gives an opportunity to be curious, right? To dig into it and to really start exploring and thinking about those things. And so I think that's kind of a big part is you have to look for what's there, but you also need to look for what's not there and kind of trying to anticipate. And you kind of ask the question like, well, why is that important? And I think especially with so much uncertainty in business, but also in technology. Um, I think positioning really matters. Strategic positioning is really, really important. And the more options that you can create, right? Um, I think better position the organization to be able to adapt to coming changes. Like to your point, you said, you can't really predict the future, but are there things there that help you anticipate certain things? And can you, from that anticipation, position yourself or create options that you can exercise as a leader that can help you take advantage of an opportunity, or that can maybe better position you to be able to mitigate risks that might be coming down the road? And I think those things are really, really critical because I think at the end of the day, how you orient yourself to those opportunities and how you build capabilities to be able to adapt to those opportunities can be a big difference maker in an organization's ability to be able to take advantage of them and to be able to really generate value from whatever those opportunities might be that are coming down the road.
Yeah, interesting insights, Afshean. I think of what was considered the A game in years prior. You heard CIOs talk about align IT with the business, which you and I hate because that just is suggesting we're not, right? We're not the business. But I think today the A game is really those who can anticipate what you just described. And that's so important to our companies and to become that enterprise leader, not the technology leader, but an enterprise leader, business leader today. So I'm really happy that you brought up the music. I was going to do that later, so I want to
Okay.
do that now.
Okay.
So, you know,
Sure.
gifted musician. It's something that you do. You've actually been and you've produced music. You played out. Talk about that side of your brain, the artist side of Afshean, and how that's made you a better digital leader. You think?
I've always been interested in art and music, and I had an opportunity to study some in college. And I always kind of say, like, I learned sometimes more about business in music school than I did in business school. And when you're playing in an ensemble, whatever that might be, you have to really learn how to listen, right? Like actively listen in real time. You have to learn how to adapt. You have to learn kind of when to lead and when not to lead, right? And that's really important. How to play a support role, and then when it's time to kind of step up and take a leadership role in an ensemble. But I think one of the most important things that I feel like I learned, being a musician is really about mastering the fundamentals. I when I was continuing to study music, there's this kind of moment that really jumps out at me. But I remember watching this drummer play, and the drummer was warming up with a really simple exercise. It was called a paradiddle. Um, and just the way that the drummer took something so simple, but then began to move it around different parts of the kit and made it sound so complex and beautiful, was really kind of a moment for me where it just clicked, where it's really like a lot of complex stuff really, really is built on top of fundamentals that are brought together in a way that can kind of create complexity. And over time, I've learned that, mastering the fundamentals, those fundamentals tend to apply to a lot of different things. So the fundamentals of business and sometimes the fundamentals of technology also apply to different domains. And so you get the benefit of when you master those fundamentals, they can kind of extend past any particular domain. And that was something that was really impactful for me, right? Is like how can you get the best you can be at the fundamentals of what you do, and when you can do that well, I think that really translates into dealing with complexity, dealing with things that maybe you've never seen before, right? Being able to ask the right question, or to know when to ask questions, or to dig a little deeper. I think again, really focusing on those fundamentals, in whatever domain it is, really, I think is kind of like the foundation that so much is built on top of.
Incredible. Well, we're going to learn more about you, Afshean, through some of your friends and colleagues who know you well. Our mystery questions.
Okay.
We got the first one teed up here, and
Okay.
somebody that really incredible leader, highly regarded, and I think what she has to say about you and your superpowers, the balancing act of doing all these things well. So just listen in, and you'll have fun with this one.
Afshin is known as being a visionary. He is somebody that can see things so far out into the future and understand the dynamics of change and innovation that are coming our way. My question would be, how do you balance that bold, visionary decision making with managing the risk that comes along with that?
I know who that is. That's Bo Rogers. She's one of my colleagues here at Colonial. It's an interesting question. I think you also have to be practical. And I think that's really, really important because if you get too far out, it can be difficult for those that you're that you're leading or that you're working with to go along the journey with you. And I think that's really important is that you really want to bring others on that journey with you. Um, but I think you also, again, you have to be practical because at the end of the day, you are running a business, right? And it's important to deliver on that business. And I think bringing in that practical side of what can you do today, what's important, and what are the things that are important after it. I like to think about the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth thing that you have to do. I think that's really, really critical to balance it all out. Is you have to bring that practicality to what you're doing now that will help you take those first, second, and third and fourth steps on that journey. Because at the end of the day, I think, trying to get anywhere, regardless of how bold it is or isn't, really starts with taking those first couple of steps and being able to, help others along that journey to take those steps with you. So I think that's really important. You have to be able to balance it. You can't sacrifice tomorrow for today, right? If that's maybe an oversimplistic way of putting it. But I like to think about how can you make today help the tomorrow you want to see become a reality? And what are those things that you can do? And sometimes they're actually pretty small. And small things can really add up over time. Sometimes they're medium-sized things and sometimes they're big things. But what are those things that you can do that will add up over time that will help you get there? And I think a lot of times, they can be very practical things.
Actually, one of your gifts that you kind of alluded to a minute ago, one of the ways to paint the picture for the future is through your ability to ask a different question. And I see so many leaders today, they ask the same questions. And of course, most of the time, you're going to get the same answers, right? So you've got this ability to frame a question in a different way, to think about problems in new ways, kind of open up new pathways to thinking and to innovation. And so if you were mentoring somebody right now, right here, what advice would you give them on the art of asking a different question?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. I think the first thing is that it starts with curiosity, like being really curious about what's being talked about, and it's a little bit of being exploratory as well, right? So, are there different ways to ask the question that gets different information? And I think it comes from also, asking the question to understand and explore. I mentioned that earlier. Um, but I think that's kind of the first place you have to start is really coming from a place of curiosity, and really trying to understand and explore the space around the particular subject, because I think there are so many things that can be around a subject that can influence maybe where it can go that may not necessarily be talked about when you're talking about something really, really specific. Like AI is a perfect example, right? We could speak very narrowly about AI, but AI is more impactful in the context in which it's going to be used. And that provides like a lot of opportunity to be inquisitive and curious about a lot of different things in those interactions. And I think asking those questions that are sometimes on the periphery of a subject or something that might be tangential or related to it is a really great way to explore um, what's going on with whatever particular subject matter that you're talking about. I do think I would say too, right? If I was mentoring, I would definitely recommend, letting folks know that they verbalize that that's what they're trying to do too. I think sometimes that can also, put the questioner and the questionee in the right frame of mind, right? Is to say, hey, I'm really curious. I really want to explore this topic. I want to ask you a few questions that might seem off topic or might seem tangential. Can we kind of go on this sort of exploratory journey together, through these questions?
I've got coming up in a few minutes, I've got another mystery question or someone who works for you today that is going to help us go a little deeper there. So we'll have some fun with that. But, with that backdrop you just gave, Afshean, I understand this AI and data is kind of a big deal today. So
Yeah, I hear that. That's the rumor.
I've heard some rumors going around, and I always
Yeah.
appreciate how you're, again, asking a different question, approaching it differently, using that curiosity, that exploratory thinking. And so Maybe just for context, where did you get your start? When and where did you get your start in AI?
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to become a data scientist at a company called Chesapeake Energy, which is no longer called Chesapeake Energy. But I had the opportunity to go and spend a few years working in the sort of AI and machine learning space. Building these technologies and applying them to our industry.
Pretty cool. Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
cool.
that was a really fun. That was a really great opportunity there, and I worked with some amazing professionals in that team too, which are they are now going and doing great things themselves. But it was a very cool opportunity.
Well, not to tip my hand or give away the question, but check out this next mystery question. Who might
Okay.
help us shine the light on that Afshean.
Afshean, I've had the pleasure of working with you at two companies now, and I'm also happy to call you both a mentor and a friend. We've collaborated on a variety of initiatives, ranging from predictive projects to high-level corporate strategy, all resulting in quite positive results for each company. They made material financial impacts. Can you talk about this superpower of yours?
So that is David Benham. He was my colleague in that data science group. He is an incredible technologist, both data scientist, data engineer, architect. Really, really, probably one of the top folks that are out there working kind of in the industrial AI space. He's a very, very gifted technologist. Yeah.
We do our homework here, Afshean. That's like,
Yeah.
we know who to go get. But yeah, talk about David. And thank you, David. Talk about David's question and in that context.
For me, I think I like to kind of think about the forest and the trees, if you will, right? Like what are we trying to do? How does it impact the business? I think you said it earlier, Dan. I always like to think about the business first and the technology second, right? So what are we trying to do to impact the business, whether that's reduce cost or increase revenue or create a competitive advantage, whatever it might be. What are we trying to accomplish, and what's that impact going to be to the business? And I think that's a very kind of like macro question, right? I also like to think about not only what are we trying to do right now, but it goes back to a little bit about like positioning. Um, is there even a bigger picture to look at, right? If we go do this one thing, is there a bigger strategy at play that we need to think about? Because I like to think about the second and third order consequences of what we're trying to do. So if we're able to accomplish this business objective, does that position us for something different after that? Does it allow us to do something we couldn't do before? And by doing that, does that mean that changes in how we might think about positioning internally, right? Whether that be with technology investments or frankly anything else. So I like to start with the big picture, like what are we trying to get to, and what are we trying to get to after that, and then after that. And then really, I think that's an important sort of North Star or guiding guidance on where we're trying to get to and what we're ultimately trying to do. But I think it's also really important, especially when you're talking about technology and many other things too. It's not just technology, where the details can matter. Like, and especially, since we're kind of talking about AI right now, AI can be very nuanced technology. It doesn't quite behave or act like many other technologies that people might be accustomed to. And so the nuances can be really important. And thinking about how you want to manage, build, and deploy that technology, the skill sets you need, the organizational change management you need. There's a lot around it, not just the tech, but also how it fits in. Everything to like, how do people interpret the outputs? What does that mean for when they're making business decisions? I think you also have to think about things like, the risks that might be associated with it. I tend to refer to this like the transactional cost of the business, right? So if it's a high transactional cost, meaning a mistake might be really expensive, you have to think about that technology's implementation very differently than if it's something that doesn't have a lot of risk or the cost is really low. And like all of those things matter. And so there's this connection between what's the big picture, what's that first, second, and third order things that you're trying to achieve, And then what are the details that are going to position you the best you can to help achieve those things with the highest probability of outcome, right? And reduce the risks of being able to get there along the way. And so, you want to reduce, inevitably you're going to make some mistakes along the way, but you want to do your best to try to reduce those because the quicker you can deploy the technology more effectively and more efficiently to be able to achieve those outcomes, ultimately that's what's best for the business. So I think, for me, I tend to look at both of those things. What's the big picture? Why does it matter? How do we position ourselves strategically to be able to go get them over time, right? That's a really important concept, over time. But then when we start talking about the details, how do we make sure that we're thinking about the right things, and that we're again, this is about positioning, ensuring that we're getting the outcomes that we want, and we're reducing the unintended consequences, that might come from, in this case, deploying something like AI in the organization.
Once again, my wheels are just turning 100 miles an hour, Afshean, from what you shared so far. I want to kind of pull a couple of these ideas together. One is you talk about the importance of fundamentals and just get the foundation right. You talk about asking a different question. When it comes to AI, Gen AI, agentic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what's the question people should be asking right now? Because we don't know what the future holds, right? But we know we got to move, right? We can't sit.
Yeah.
We can sit right now.
Yeah. So I think the first one is really more of a strategic question, not a technical question. And I think this is really important because, again, it goes back to the kind of this idea of positioning. It's, for whatever business that you might be in, and they're all different. I think it goes back to the prior comment you made that your recruiting friend talked about, CIO positions. I think that's really a reflection of the need for every business, and it's different. And so I think the first strategic question really is like, do you think AI is going to impact your business in some way, right? And if the answer is no, then I think the answer is clear on how you may proceed. But if you think the answer is yes, then I think there's kind of another layer that you need to kind of go down into, or at least I would recommend, is what kind of impact do you think it might be to your business? Do you think it just might be something that will drive incremental value? Do you think it might be something that will drive significant value or even potentially be a competitive advantage to your business? Or do you think it could be extremely disruptive, right? Or even just disruptive, not necessarily extremely disruptive. But could it be disruptive to your business? And I think, as we think about AI and how they're introduced to various industries, I think that's really important because that influences the kinds of investments you need to make. It influences not only in AI itself, but the ecosystem around AI. So one of the most important things around AI specifically is the infrastructure, scalable infrastructure. To really be able to leverage AI in larger at-scale industries, you also need the scalable infrastructure underneath that technology to really be able to gain the value. And so kind of where you're at and what you think or how you think AI is going to impact your business is an important starting point in how everything that comes after that will be. It doesn't mean you can't change, right? It doesn't mean you can't pivot. As you learn more, you should. But I think that's an important conversation for leaders to have because it will influence early important decisions about how you choose to invest in it.
Yeah. So for everybody out there, I get asked a question every day by CIOs and digital leaders, what are others doing in the space? And,
Sure.
make sure you answer that question. What do you believe? And, maybe a small point, but I think it's a big point. You've mentioned the importance of scalable infrastructure. And it's interesting, Ashton, because that's the point of this whole mini series that we're doing, right? Critical infrastructure on a grand scale, $7 trillion investment. And companies like Colonial are right smack in the middle of it. So your point's not lost on me. Could you share? Hopefully you'll be able to open the kimono a little bit here. But the 4 pillars that you focus on, one of them is really laser focused, is around digitization.
Yes.
Why is that so important given the conversation we're having, Afshean?
To take advantage of some of what AI can deliver, to an organization, a lot of times the processes need to be digital, right? AI needs ones and zeros. And in many organizations, there can be a lot of processes that are still manual. And so to be able to take advantage of things like generative and agentic AI as an example, the degrees of digitization that an organization might have around critical processes is kind of an important measure of how quickly or how much you may need to invest in to be able to deploy those technologies or how effective they may or may not be within your organization. I think, though, there's another dimension too, is that when digitization is done well, it's not just applying technology to a process, but it's really looking closely at the business process first. Like the focus is the business process and the technology is brought to it. And I almost like to think of it as a little bit as like, I wouldn't say a conversation, but there's a back and forth a little bit about, what can the technology bring that might be able to enhance the way the business process is executed within the organization. And that's a real opportunity, right? Not to just bring in technology to maybe digitize a process, but to actually rethink how the process is done given the capabilities of the technology and what the business needs ultimately. And so that particular exercise, again, when digitization is done well, my observation has been is that it can actually set up a opportunity for these agentic and Gen AI type capabilities, or even machine learning and other kinds of things, to be able to come in and be able to generate value more quickly, right? And to be able to apply to those processes or to the outcomes that are generated from those processes more efficiently, or in some cases with less investment and less time. So I think digitization, right, is an important component to thinking about your AI strategy. So, we talked about, scalable infrastructure. Another one of those two is targeted data investments, which I think is really important. The third one is, your machine learning operations, AI ops, and your talent. And the fourth one is the digitization.
Yeah, big talent. We don't have time today probably to dive. We could do a whole segment on the talent, the digital workforce, and how you're equipping the team there. But I want to kind of go back to something you just said. I think a lot of well-intentioned CIOs and digital leaders today are just trying to run fast, responding to their business partners. How does it play out if we don't step up, lead, influence the conversation, slow things down to get the business process right? Maybe it's not broken, but maybe it's not AI ready. What's going to happen when they throw AI on top of that current business process without thinking through it first?
Well, I think the likelihood is you're going to get outcomes you don't want, or it's going to be more expensive to get the outcomes that you want, or it might take more time, more resources, et cetera. I think this is really why, when you hear CIOs and other digital leaders talk about things like platform strategy, I think it's really important to be thinking about the business processes that drive the core outcome of the business, but also like what you're going to want to do with it in the future, and thinking about how you're going to get all of this stuff to talk together. Because one of the really powerful things about the potential of AI is that, you can put them in very disparate sort of processes and you can get value from it. But when you can tie all of that together, when you can stitch it together and you get the bigger contextualization of the business, there's a multiplying effect that I think could happen when you can bring more of that together. But yeah, I mean, going back to your original question, I think really thinking about, slowing down a little bit. You don't have to slow down a whole lot, but, slowing down a little bit and really thinking about not only just this one thing you're trying to do, but what might be a portfolio of opportunities, because there could be other opportunities within the organization that are similar, that can get you to consider technologies and also business processes more broadly. And so you could take advantage of a bigger portfolio of opportunities that could influence your decision-making differently than if you're only looking at like one opportunity or two opportunities. You could also, potentially provide greater enablement to the organization, right? When thinking about how you would execute an entire portfolio versus how you would execute one or two projects. because you are likely to position and invest differently if you're going after a portfolio than you would be if you were trying to just get one or two projects, through your project funnel.
Makes you think to some of our conversations, kind of a two-part. One is around the funding, right? You talk about investment, but your thoughts on how this should get funded, and you've always told me that the real value, the real benefit comes with scale. So can you talk about funding and scale and how those go together?
Yeah, so I tend to think about, again, the underlying needs to activate AI, much like you would any other infrastructure project, right? And so investing in the right platforms, technologies, skill sets is a really important start. And there's a lot of different ways to go about it, right? So again, every organization is a little different. Different size of the organization matters. Their business matters. The velocity and speed of the organization matters. So this is a very general statement that should be, morphed into whatever that particular business needs. But one of the things that I've observed is that you can do a lot of proof of concepts, as you can demonstrate a lot of value early, right? You can show people that there's a potential value from doing these kinds of initiatives. But what can happen is that when you do many POCs and you can demonstrate the capability on a small scale, there's a different level of expertise, investment, and execution that's needed to scale those things out. And by scale, I mean apply that across, a business, right? And that jump from small scale proof of concepts to large scale deployment can take time and can take significant investment. And so really kind of having an idea of where you want your AI strategy to be, what your investment profile can look like, what kind of infrastructure you need to invest in early to position yourself well with the idea of success, right? What happens when we're successful? And being able to frame that up, I think, is really important, so that when you do demonstrate that value, your partners in your various functional areas now don't have to wait 12, 18, 24 months to be able to get the infrastructure built. You're able to pivot and move quicker, and be able to deliver that value more at scale across your various businesses.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. And this is why people need to go back and listen to this again and take some notes, because that's really good thinking right there. And, you talk about foundational. I understand data is kind of important to this whole equation. And,
Yeah, just a little bit.
a little bit, right? I think
Yeah.
we're a lot of organizations are getting very uncomfortable right now when they realize the state of data. But, years ago, there was that catchy phrase of data is the new oil, and it makes sense. People still quote it today, but
Sure. Yeah. I remember the cover of The Economist.
The
Yeah.
Economist, thank you. I was trying to think of
Yes.
it just
Yeah.
now where that was. And but in reality, data is probably even more valuable than oil, right? You use it one time and then it's gone, right? So just be curious to get you rapping about data, how you're thinking about it. And one of your great Afsheanisms is data as a mirror. Can you
Yeah.
talk about all that?
Yeah. So I learned this a little bit during my time, as I was a data scientist, is that, you oftentimes hear the adage garbage in, garbage out. And I think that's true, but I think it's more nuanced than that, right? Obviously, data is really, really important. And maybe I'll start with kind of how I think about data. To your question, is that for me, all data is a reflection of a digital or physical phenomenon that's happened, right? And so to me, I tend to look at it as a mirror. And the analogy that I like to use is I think about like a carnival funhouse. Have you ever been in a carnival funhouse where you have all those mirrors that make you look, tall or wide or really short, or whatever it might be? It distorts your the reflection that you're getting from the mirror. I tend to see data the same way, right? And this really kind of goes into the whole kind of data quality thing. I think data quality is really important in context. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, if the value is wrong, then it's wrong. I get it. But a lot of times the context of what you're trying to do with machine learning or AI or analytics or whatever, it is important to whether or not the data is good enough. And so I like to, again, think about it as a carnival funhouse analogy. If all I'm trying to do is to see if there's something in the mirror, right? All of that distortion is perfectly fine. All I'm trying to say is there's something there, right? But if what I'm trying to do is to describe whatever is in the reflection in extreme detail, well, then that's a very different context around data quality. And so the reason why I think this is important is because sometimes I've seen where we don't want to get started until our data is quote unquote good. But what I would say is that you can actually have different degrees of goodness and badness of data. And getting started can actually be an approach to figure out where you need to make targeted data investments. So I talked a little bit about this, about being one of the 4 pillars, is that trying to solve these problems with your data that you have can actually give you the context and the tool that you need to go, this is where and how we need to invest in that data. Because if the data is good enough for this problem, we can now add this much business value, right? And I think just getting started and really understanding that nuance about data and its impact to the outcome of whatever technology you're trying to deploy against it is really, really critical, because you could find in some cases maybe you don't need to spend as much money as you thought to clean up your data and get good data, or maybe you need to spend more. And I think it also provides, again, technology leaders to, again, be business leaders first and to say, hey, here's what we've discovered from this investment. If we can put in, XYZ dollars, we think we can get this much better performance, which will now translate into this much better business value for whatever we're trying to do.
Yeah, so good. So actually, we've kind of dug in quite a bit to AI and data, and we could continue on here. I know that you have a lot of big thoughts around IT and OT and the convergence there, but I want to kind of get back to the leadership superpowers. And so we've got a couple of colleagues who have and have had a front row seat. So let's listen to this first one, and I think you'll have fun with this question.
Afshean, accountability and cross-functional ownership are both very important concepts that you talk about frequently. But what strategies have you found to be effective at encouraging leaders to take responsibility beyond just their immediate scope?
Yeah, so that's John Dixon. He's on my team. He's a colleague of mine. He's the CISO here at Colonial. That's a really good question. I think the first one, and it's the most important one in my mind, is the invitation, right? Is to, you have to invite people into that opportunity to step up and to take accountability, which also means that you also have to set the expectation, right? So I think that's really important, is, obviously setting clear expectations. But for kind of to the other part of John's question around, people to step up and take up more, I think there's an invitation that's really, really important that oftentimes gets missed. I think as leaders, we can expect people to just, want to take on more, but sometimes leaders don't know where. They may not know how. They may have had an experience in the past that's maybe discouraged that. And there's all kinds of different context around that. And so I would say, again, the first one really is around how can you create an invitation for leaders to be able to step into taking on more. And then the second part is for those leaders who choose to do so, how do you support them? And I think thinking about for leaders to think about, one, how do you create that invitation and encouragement? But then when that person does, how do you as their leader support them in doing that? Because they're likely going to be taking on maybe something they've never done before, something that's new. How do you provide that support structure to help them be successful when they do take that risk? And for some folks, it can be viewed out as a risk to do more and to take on more to help them be successful in doing so. I think that's really, really important as leaders.
Yeah. Thank you, John. That's a really, really phenomenal question. And I had a few others, actually. One of the ones I would love to get your perspective on are the chats you both have around the shadow that we
Oh
cast as
yeah.
leaders, right? And then what signals do you send when you're just thinking aloud versus actually giving direction? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually learned the whole shadow of leadership at a different company, which I found very, very valuable. But basically what they shared with us and what they taught us is that, whether we know it or not, as leaders, we all cast a shadow. And do we know what that is? And are we intentional about what shadow we're casting? I think to that question that you had asked is around, engaging. And it kind of goes back to really one of the earlier questions you asked me about, when how I would mentor someone. Um, I think when you want to create generative conversation and dialogue, especially if you have someone who's a direct report to you, I think it's important that you set the stage for that, right? Because it's not always clear what we're trying to do as leaders. Like it's clear to us because we know what we're trying to intend, but it's not always necessarily clear to everyone else. And so I think that's one thing that I've learned over time that's really important is just kind of creating the stage, saying, "Hey, I'm going to think out loud with you all here. I want to explore this idea. What are your thoughts?" Again, I really think invitation is so critical in leadership to invite others to be able to contribute, to be able to share their thoughts, even more so, and more importantly, when they're different than yours, or maybe when they disagree with you, creating that invitation for them to share those thoughts I think is really, really important for leaders. My personal philosophy is that my objective is to get to the best answer, not my answer. And so, how do we do that together as a team? And so I think those things that I mentioned are really, really important to do that. If you want to create that space for generative conversation and to really try to get to the best answer that the team can provide.
Yeah, you just made me think of one of my favorite Churchill quotes. Actually, I use it often, but he said, "Leadership courage is knowing when to stand up and speak. It's also knowing when to sit down and listen." Right, and in these times, if you want to get the best answer, as soon as the leader speaks in that room, you know, it's going to take the conversation down a path versus listening and really getting people stepping up. So thank you again, John Dixon, and a good friend. And got one more from
Okay.
an old friend, OL, not OLD, an old friend of yours.
Okay.
So
Okay.
listen to this last mystery question.
You're one of the smartest people I know. And one of the things you and I have talked a lot about is the challenge and difficulty in getting people to come along with you on the journey. So, what are some of the things you learned to help you connect with people, get them to understand your vision, and get them excited about what it is you're trying to do with technology?
So I recognize that voice. That is Buck Wheaton. He is one of the finest technology leaders that I have had the opportunity to work with in my time working in technology. Uh, he asked you a question. He's right. We have talked about this quite a few times in various settings. Um, I think I, the first thing that I would say is that he asked, what does it take to get others to understand my vision? I would probably say the first thing to do is to understand where they are at in their journey. By they, I mean those that I'm working with, leading, partnering with, whatever it might be. So I would say first is to understand them and where they're at and what their context and thinking is first, right? To kind of create that invitation again. I guess I've said it now 4 times, but can't stress how important the invitation part is. And start there and really take time to listen and to understand what they're coming from, what's important to them, what that context is, what's on their mind, what are their concerns, where do they see value, and then sharing, you know, hey, this is where I want to go, and then figuring out how do you meet them where they're at as a leader, and try to walk that path, because sometimes it can be very different than what someone is accustomed to, and I think trying to understand that is really important. So I would say, to start there first, I think also too, you have to have regular check-ins. It's not just one conversation; it's multiple conversations with people as you're moving forward, whether it's leading through change or trying to get somewhere else in your organization or business. I think that regular check-in to continue to calibrate, right? Not just calibrate on your understanding of them, but how are you calibrating like your own view with new information? And I think that's really important for leaders too, is that, we can have a vision of where to go. And at that point in time, that might be the right vision at the time. But as new information comes up, as we learn more, as our depth of understanding grows, we have to continue to calibrate that vision. Maybe the ultimate goal might be the same or similar, but how you get there might need to change. And that ability to change and adapt by listening to others and understanding where they are at in the organization, I think is vital, honestly.
Yeah, great answer. And Buck, always appreciate you and the way you think and the way you lead. And, quick, a little side story, fun fact. I'm not sure if I've shared this with you before, Afshean, but years ago when we first met, the first time we met, I remember it just like it was yesterday. And your then CIO invited me to come meet his leadership team. And I remember leaving that meeting and I called my team and I'm like, great meeting. We're going to be doing some exciting things together. But there's two guys in that room that really stood out and are going to be future CIOs. So thank you, Afshean, for making me 50% right. And anytime now, Buck is going to make me 100% right because it's just a matter of time. Don't you think?
Indeed.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, for sure. On that front, we've done a lot together. We talked about digital workforce, how you lean into your people, invest in your people. We've done a lot around leadership development. And as you know, on the podcast, we have this Tech for Good program, which we're very, very serious about investing into our profession and particularly our nonprofits out there. So is there an organization that you can think of that you'd like to gift a seat in our TechLX program, Afshean?
Yes. The Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits. They're a statewide organization in Oklahoma that really works with other nonprofits on supporting them, right? And that's oftentimes through training and other ways of support on how to more effectively run a nonprofit and to deliver on that mission. I had the great privilege of spending 9 years on their board. I just retired off the board last week. They do wonderful work for the state and for all the other nonprofits. And it was a great privilege to be a small part of what they did. And I think this would be a great opportunity for them to participate.
That's fantastic. I am not familiar with them, so we will definitely do some research and we'll get them plugged in, Afshean. And and what I just heard, Afshean, as of a week ago, you're now available for more board work. I'm just saying. I'm just going to put it out there.
Fair enough.
I know you're a little busy right now, but no, it's all good. Well, Afshean, we're going to spend a little more time here. You and I, we're going to work on your article, your CI.com article, and we've got some great topics to dig into. But I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to let us pull back the curtain. And you just kind of gave us a master class on how to tackle the big gnarly, the big challenges that keep American critical infrastructure awake today, and all those opportunities out there for an AI-driven future. So thank you so much for making this happen.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It was a great privilege to be able to speak to you and your audience, and I hope that this was at least helpful to some folks in some small way. Yeah, I get a lot out of hearing all of the other folks that you bring onto this show. So, thank you for including me into a very esteemed group of leaders to share my thoughts. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, well deserved. And I know it was a long time coming. We finally did it, Afshean. So thanks for making it happen.
That's
Great. And, I'll say for everyone, this is just the beginning of our special Critical Infrastructure for Critical Infrastructure series. Next up, we're going to hear from Mike Adams from Black & Veatch, who's helping build and secure the water, power, and data center infrastructure fueling the AI boom. Following Mike is going to be a sit down with Katrina Redmond from Eaton. whose team is innovating the modern power grid to keep pace with a world that never stops computing. She too is unbelievable. Afshean and I are going to spend a little more time together, as you all know, having a conversation now and going deeper into how he leads change, how he makes decisions at the speed of AI. So I hope you'll share this episode with someone who needs to understand what real critical infrastructure for critical infrastructure looks like. And as always, keep whispering the right questions to tackle your own gnarly challenges. Until next time, everyone stay well.